Hey guys, thanks again for joining another episode of Art of the Assistant. It's a real blessing for me to be able to minister to you in this way. I know when I was assistant, it was so difficult to find things to help relate to where we were sitting in our seat as an assistant pastor. But before we get started in today's episode, let me remind you that my book is out and available for you at any major bookstore, Ministering from the Middle. Again, a book written to help encourage you as assistant pastors or even pastors in this role of an assistant. If you're an assistant pastor just looking for some help and guidance, I know the book will be a blessing to you. And if you're a senior pastor and you're just wanting to know how to better minister to and mentor your assistants, this book will be a blessing to you and a help to you as well. So please pick up your copy of Ministering from the Middle today. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us on Art of the Assistant. And again, I know you know what's coming. I'm very excited about the guest that we have today. But I have been watching this man for many years and just inspired by his writing and his work and what he's done for the next generation of pastors. And I'm very excited to have Bobby Jamieson with us, as he's now gone on to a different ministry and kind of left the scene of DC and 9 Marks, but we're excited to have Bobby here. Bobby, thank you so much for joining us.
Very kind of you, brother. Good to be with you.
Yeah, so we're excited today, and I'm just going to turn things over to you and give us a little bit of your history. We know you've made a transition in ministry, and that's not always easy, but that could be another podcast down the road. But just kind of your history of your role as an assistant, kind of what you did there, and maybe even a little bit of how God's led you into where you are today.
Sure, yeah. I grew up in California in the San Francisco Bay Area. I went to college in LA and was introduced to expository preaching and Reformed theology and all kinds of good stuff through Grace Community Church there. And I went out and interned at Capitol Hill Baptist Church back in 2008, right after
Okay.
graduating college. My wife and I are newly married, and so CHBC has played a formative role in my life for a long time. We stuck around for a couple of years, and I worked for 9 Marks as an editor, and just continued training for ministry. Then had a season of theological study at Southern and Louisville, then a PhD in Cambridge, and then we came back to DC so I could serve as one of the associate pastors at CHBC. That was 2017 to 2024, and my role there was the kind of next main preacher, teacher, staff leader, etc. Kind of a
Okay.
pretty strong number two type role, both
Yeah.
in terms of amount of teaching and preaching and kind of overseeing the church's internship, doing some staff leadership, and helping out with facilitating local planting and revitalizing. I was grateful for that role. It was a wonderful experience. I learned a ton and benefited from the church a ton and miss those saints dearly.
Mm.
Um, and I really appreciate kind of the shape of the role that I had, which we can talk about. It's something that I'm trying to replicate if the Lord gives me opportunity, in terms of being a senior pastor alongside an associate. But yeah, I desired to be preaching full time and kind of having that overall leadership role. And in God's providence, we applied for a couple of pastoral opportunities that didn't work out. And a friend suggested planting in Chapel Hill here in North Carolina. And the Lord brought amazing people out of the woodwork. There was all sorts of green lights from local pastors here who thought, that's a good idea. We need more healthy evangelical churches, and you'd be a good person for it.
Mm.
And so we moved just about a year ago. It's mid-June now. We moved in July 8th last year.
Oh, okay.
So we've been here not quite a year, and the church has covenanted at the end of September. So the church has existed for about 9 months. So I'm the senior
Oh,
pastor
wow.
now. I have another pastor serving with me full time, Michael, who's wonderful. He was serving elsewhere. He was serving as an associate pastor of a church in Dubai, and
Mm.
he's an associate pastor of our church plant. And his role here, obviously we have a smaller church, but his role
Yeah.
here is a lot like my role was at CHBC.
Okay. Very good. So you spent a little bit of time then, and then went off and finished up your degree, so your PhD and
Yep.
those things. So okay, all
Yeah.
right.
A couple of
You
years, a
married at
couple of
that?
years at CHBC. What's that?
Yeah. So you did like a 2-year internship there. Is
Well,
that
the
what you're
internship
saying?
was only a semester long, and then I stuck
Okay.
around and just had a job at 9 Marks and kept,
Okay.
teaching and
Yeah.
getting to
Yeah. Yeah.
observe things and getting kind of
Yeah.
poured into for a couple of years.
Okay. I love that. And then off and finish up that degree, and then okay, and
Yeah,
then back.
MDiv, THM at Southern, and then a doctorate in Cambridge.
All right. I love that. And then back working with Mark hand in hand there
Yeah,
for
for 7 years.
years. Wow.
Neighbors, co-pastors,
Is that right?
boss, mentor, friend.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
what an
he had
opportunity.
multiple balconies in his house where he could look down into my yard. I mean, there we were very, very close.
You get a text message, Bobby, what are you doing right now? And,
Taking
throw that
pictures of
ball a
me
little better.
reading a book on my day off. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. And that's awesome. So the Lord led you guys to plant, and how are things going with the church plant now?
yeah, doing well by God's grace. We meet
Good.
in an elementary school, which has nice acoustics for the singing. The
Okay,
church
yeah,
is
yeah.
singing loud.
Yeah.
There's a sweet spirit of unity in the congregation. People are sharing the gospel. It feels like there's deeper and more established relationships between members of the church than you might expect, considering we're
Yeah.
only 9 months in. So there's a very
Right,
sweet
right.
sense of being a family together already.
That's fantastic, man. That's really good. And praise the Lord for that and what you guys are doing. Now, where are you located like in Chapel Hill? Are you did you focus right
Yeah.
in between the two colleges? Are you leaning one toward the
Well,
other?
our family lives in Chapel Hill. We have a church
Okay.
office that's kind of our in-law unit. Our membership is probably split between Chapel Hill and Durham,
Okay.
and then a
Okay.
little bit in the surrounding areas. We're
Yeah.
definitely more proximity to UNC, but we do have some Duke people. So I'd say
Okay.
we're certainly trying to reach both universities. We have
Yeah.
a little more direct access to UNC.
Great. That's great, man. Well, very good. Well, that's fantastic. Again, thank you for jumping on with us today. And I'm gonna dive into this idea of, you referred to your pastor as mentor.
Hmm.
And I know you were very much involved in mentoring the next generation, obviously. And I just want to talk about this. It's a heart of mine. We have a summer intern with me this summer. He just got in over the weekend. He's staying at my house
Sweet.
and 20 years old. And I love that,
Yeah.
just investing in him. And I walked in where we've got him his little office. I said, "All right, let's have a father-son talk." And just diving in and trying to invest in him while I can. We do like a 2-year residency program as well, where I bring guys in for this couple of years. So I love
Yep.
that, and a lot of what even I've read from you, things you've written, and like that. So just talk to us a little bit, Bobby, about the importance of being mentored
Hmm.
and why you saw the need for that, and then how we can be mentors even as an assistant, how we can have an impact on the next generation. So why is it important for us to have a mentor in our lives, and what have you seen with that?
Sure. Well, let me answer that from a couple of angles. One
Okay.
is the way that key convictions and gospel faithful church
Hmm.
practices are transmitted is not just teaching, but observing somebody's way of
It's
life.
good.
So like
Yeah.
when Paul says in Philippians 4:9, what you have learned and received and heard and seen in
Mm.
me, practice these things, and the God
Yeah.
of peace will be with you. So this is just
Yeah.
part of how disciples are made. This is part of how we're
Hmm.
formed as Christians.
Good.
And all the more so as pastors. Paul writing to Timothy in Second Timothy talks about all the things that Timothy, as a minister of the gospel, a kind of apostolic delegate, all the things that Timothy has observed in Paul. So Paul
Mm.
appeals in Second Timothy 3:10. You, however, have followed my teaching, my conduct, my aim in life, my faith, my patience, my love, my steadfastness, my persecutions and sufferings. And so the things Timothy
Mm.
taught Paul were not just doctrine, but it was his whole way of life. And so I
It's
think
good.
that's how Christian disciples are made, that type of
Yeah.
all of life access and all of life observation. And I think it's also how pastors are made fundamentally,
Mm.
seeing someone's whole way of life. How do they obey Jesus? How do they respond to suffering? And even then, in a more specific sense, Paul gives that charge in Second Timothy 2:2. What
Yeah.
you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. And so, if you're thinking about mentoring in a pastoral sense, a ministerial sense, there's this kind of personal process of handing off,
Mm.
handing on. And so, I think it's ideal. I mean, the Lord, walks us through all different kinds of circumstances in His providence, but as a pastor, you should be striving to serve as a mentor and hand these things on to other men who are able to teach others also. And I do think if you're aspiring to the ministry, it's a good thing to pray for. It's a good thing to seek out. I would say both a minister who can mentor you in some measure, but not only that, a model for the church for how to do church, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
how are you
Right.
going to be a pastor if you don't know what a church is? So I think
Right.
gaining a model, not just a faithful pastoral ministry, how do you have hard conversations? How do you prepare sermons? How do you kind of do the day-to-day work of ministry?
Hmm.
Not just a model as a pastor, but actually a model for the church. What does a
Yeah.
healthy church feel like? How do the kind of key ingredients fit together? How does this piece relate to that piece? Kind of an immersive,
Mm.
hands-on experience. And so the CHBC internship that I was able to participate in many years ago and had several years of helping to oversee really
Yeah.
aims at both those things, kind of a biblical blueprint for the church. 'Cause there's kind of two main pieces. One is studying most of the day, most of the week on what does the Bible say about the church, and using older sources, new writings, stuff that
Hmm.
tries to push your nose into scripture to ask every
Yeah.
question you could think of about worship, ordinances, discipline, membership,
Mm.
missions, all kinds of stuff. And then to be observing. So one half is study and really studying the doctrine of the church and other stuff on ministry, preaching. But the kind of secret sauce of CHBC's internship is that it's really all about ecclesiology.
That's good.
And the other half is then observing. You're participating in the church. You're at every service of the church. You're sitting in and watching elders meetings and getting a chance to
Hmm.
debrief with Mark or one of the other pastors afterward. You're just watching,
Yeah.
listening,
Yeah.
learning. I think it's, between doing CHBC's internship 17 years ago and then having a little bit more of a season of sticking around and observing. That was probably more formative for me as a pastor than anything else. And then, of course, by God's grace, I had the season of serving as an associate pastor, where I both am doing ministry, but also learning and continuing to grow, and in that sense,
Yeah.
being mentored by Mark.
Yeah.
Your last question about kind of mentoring as an associate pastor or in any kind of assistant
Yeah.
role, I think this is something that I saw the CHBC staff pastors do really well in the sense that all of the staff pastors were sort of open to having that training speed. How do I
Mm.
bring someone else along and equip
That's
them in
great.
what I'm doing? It takes
Yeah.
the heart for it. It takes the kind of generosity. It takes the willingness to give a little bit of your time in a way that you might be able to sort of maximize your time in
Yeah.
meetings, study prep, whatever, do things more quote unquote efficiently.
Hmm.
But that willingness to slow down, bring someone else in, talk with them, train them, debrief, and kind of walk the sort of stages from them simply observing to them doing more and more.
Hmm.
I think that's part of how you equip the next generation. And there's a lot in even informally that you can do as an associate pastor for that.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I think one of my favorite verses too, along with that, is when Jesus was picking his disciples. I think it's Mark says that he would be with them. And
Yeah,
that's
Mark
really that's what
3:14. Yeah.
3:14, yeah. And that's what it's about. It's that spending time with them. And it doesn't matter where we are, we can do that, right? From an assistant. But like you said, it's a mindset too of willing to give of ourselves and of our time.
Mhm.
Because it's, like we just brought this young man in over the weekend. So Monday he was with me and I was going through sermon prep. Okay, this is how I jump into the passage. And, so instead of working on my computer, I worked on the screen in my office so he could see,
Show them.
what we were doing. Yeah, and
Yeah.
show him how to do that. And is that completely efficient? Not necessarily, but necessary.
Mhm.
He's like, man, I've never seen that before. I've always struggled on how to go about working through a passage. And that's what we can do with that.
Absolutely. That's part of what we've built in. We have a little mini internship we've already started in our church
Oh
plant.
man, great. I was going to ask that. Have you guys started it already?
We have, yeah, and it's kind of a $0
Awesome.
approach. It's about 10, 12 hours a week. It goes for 9 months, so longer than
Okay.
CHBCs. So we can have the guys with us a little bit longer. We don't pay them, so they have to already have a job or be doing something
Yeah,
else.
yeah.
So it's part-time, but we have them, we try to accomplish the essence of what CHBC was doing in terms of study on the church.
Hmm.
One piece that I've added that I kind of did a little bit of at CHBC, but have built in more is a weekly sermon prep workshop. So this is
Okay.
the pastors of the church, the interns, and even a number of guests are welcome to come. And they have to produce an exegetical outline on the passage, a homiletical outline, and thoughts on application. And
Mm.
so it's an hour and a half every Wednesday afternoon. And we start by just asking exegetical questions. What does the passage mean? Until that bucket is fully emptied out for everybody. And then they all present their exegetical outline and preaching outline and kind of main point.
Okay.
How would you
Yeah.
articulate a main point? And then they kind of go around and I and the other pastor Michael kind of assess them,
Yeah.
critique them, evaluate them. Sometimes we give an award for the worst one, you know.
I love that.
And then they work over mine. And sometimes
Okay.
sometimes it results in a substantive improvement, or sometimes I'm
Yeah.
torn. I could go two different
Yeah. Yeah.
directions.
Yeah.
So it is. it is an investment of time, but I've found, especially being able to do it consistently, it's a
Yeah.
fixed time, fixed part of the schedule. I think
Right.
it's improving my sermons much more. It's worth, in other words, it's worth the hour and a half. It's
Right.
worth the hour and a
I'm with
half
you. Yeah.
just for the input I get. And all of these brothers who have to be there or who want to be there, you can see them growing. You can see them improving, the
Right.
kind of questions they're asking, their ability to kind of cross the bridge, get over the hump from just describing the passage to packaging it to preach it.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think we're already seeing good results because you're kind of doing the guts of a sermon, the essence of
Yeah.
it,
Right.
without
Right.
having to go and preach it.
Right. And continuing with that word guts, that takes guts to do that because I mean you're throwing your sermon out there just to be critiqued or what do you think? And
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But that's really good. Now, at CHBC, did Mark do something like that? I mean, did he read through his sermon on Saturday nights?
You
Did you
know,
go over it on Sunday
he
nights? I've
does
heard a little bit of both.
he does a couple of things. So
Okay.
he does a sermon read through. Once he has the
Yes.
manuscript, he kind of sends out a blast email to a bunch of people who usually come, and he'll
Yeah.
read it late Saturday night to whoever wants
That's
to
what
come
I've heard.
and give him
Yeah.
feedback in advance. I have not replicated that one. That one doesn't quite work with me as well.
Yeah.
I'm more getting my feedback earlier in the process in that
Yes.
workshop time is how
Yes.
I do it. But Mark
Yeah.
also does this Saturday lunch where and it's more of a crew of friends. It's not like an official staff
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
Um, it's a long lunch on Saturday and it's similar. They have to prepare outlines, they have to prepare thoughts on
Okay.
application. It's a similar format. I've just moved mine earlier in the week so
Yeah.
I can use it as kind of a midweek check-in, help me get over the
Mhm.
hump to be forming the sermon. Because I try to basically finish my kind of study and pre-prep on Thursday and then write it on Friday.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm similar to that, and that's really good. I love that, and that sounds fantastic. So, since you've already implemented it, you've kind of give us some insight. Um, so one, obviously, you're talking about sermon prep and teaching these guys how to do that, and then do you feel that ecclesiology is very important in these regards as well?
Yeah, that's right. So the main thing they're doing is reading, older works on the church, newer works on the church, things that get at membership, discipline, congregationalism, the regulative principle of
Yeah.
worship, uh, trying to get a biblical vision of the church. And they'll do readings, write short papers. I read the papers. We have a discussion every other Thursday afternoon just to let the
Okay.
topics kind of bundle and accumulate a little bit. And yeah, I think they would say, the guys who just finished would say it's very much kind of here's what the Bible says a church is. That kind of gives you a target to aim at as a
Hmm.
pastor, a kind of direction, a kind of compass bearing to know what it is you're trying to build under God. So
Yeah.
that's and I do think the practical stuff is helpful. They get to
Yeah.
sit in and observe elders meetings now that we have a kind of fully functioning eldership. They attend every meeting of the church and we have a service review. So I guess if you go throughout the whole week, the kind of distinctive internship elements, there's one or two reading and writing assignments each week. There's
Okay.
attending every public gathering of the church.
Yeah.
There's a service review lunch on Monday, followed by a brief staff meeting. And then
Okay.
there's the sermon prep workshop on Wednesday and every other intern discussion.
Okay.
So observing the church, studying the church, the
Yeah.
sermon, discussing and reviewing, then
Right.
the sermon prep piece.
Okay. So like if one of these guys were sitting in an elders meeting and then the elders meeting is over, you're talking about debriefing. Is that where someone will sit down with them and say, okay, let's talk about what happened or who said what?
Yeah, so we've only just started. We've only just had a couple of elders meetings, so we haven't
Okay.
had kind of as much of a need. But if I
Right,
think
right.
back to CHBC, yeah, those CHBC elders meetings are many hours long. They're full of all kinds
Yeah.
of stuff,
Yeah.
and so it would be typically Mark, but if he was gone, it might be me or another pastor, just kind of giving an hour the next day to just, you
Okay.
know, any questions you have about what this issue was or even more process. How did the elders think through whether to address this issue?
Yeah.
Pastoral hard cases. I mean, yeah, so very much helping them process what they'd seen.
All right, that's great. Yeah, I mean, that's just practical. I think that's just so good because it's practically working with these guys and these young men and they feel like they have the freedom to ask these questions or
Yes,
why.
and it's also trying to get at like we would want them to read. They would get kind of most of the elder packet or a big chunk of it. Obviously, some
Hmm.
stuff's sensitive just for the elders, but they would get
Yeah,
as
right.
much as we thought kind of confidentiality, discretion could
Hmm.
kind of permit.
Yeah.
And we would make it a reading requirement. Like you're meant to read through this, you're meant to pray through this, you're meant to come to this meeting to observe as if
Mm.
you had a voice and a vote. Because Lord willing, one day you will. You're going to be
Yeah.
dealing with all this
Yeah.
stuff. And
Yeah.
um, and so we wanted them to be invested observers And I do think them
Mm,
kind of having to wrestle with these issues. How would you vote? How would you decide it?
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a very engaged kind of observation.
Yeah. And so starting off then, man, some of these guys are listening and maybe, man, we don't have the financial resources. I wish we could bring somebody in, or maybe there's a little bit there they can help.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, it's something you would highly recommend.
Yeah, well, I like the way you're doing. I think kind of what you're doing and what I'm doing are two of the easiest kind of low cost options.
Right.
In the sense, if you have a college age guy who has a free summer, that is a great way to just take a guy, particularly if he can get some teaching experience,
Hmm.
maybe give him a evening sermon series or
Yep.
something, or
Yep.
midweek or whatever it is. I think a college age guy who has serious potential for ministry, a summer can be a good fit. If you've got a bedroom for him, if you've got a little spare money for books, you can feed him
Hmm.
on the cheap. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in our case, we pay for books out of the church budget, and
Hmm.
to go to a conference or two, state convention, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's only a couple $1,000 basically,
Right.
to pay for a
Right.
couple of interns for the
Right.
books and everything, and so
Yeah.
that's virtually no cost.
Yes.
And so I would say if you can get guys part-time, obviously it's wonderful to be able to do a full-time
Yeah.
residency if you've got
Yeah.
housing, if you've got a stipend you can give. But yeah, if you've got very little money, I think by God's grace, our kind of first class we just did, I think already bore a lot of fruit,
That's awesome.
was really encouraging, virtually
Yeah.
no cost. The main cost is just the time.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I agree. And yeah, anything, like I said, anything we can give, and it gives, I think too, it gives these young guys a taste of ministry or what ministry does look like or could look like. And it's getting them thinking about what they want, what they're looking for. And I don't know, Bobby, I think it's biblical. It's just that Second Timothy 2:2. It's just pouring into those faithful men who will be able to do the same,
Yeah,
you
that's right.
know.
I think it's so much of what you learn is through, watching a real pastor work through
Yeah.
real hard knocks of shepherding his
Yeah.
family,
Right.
challenges in ministry, preaching
Yes.
hard passages, kind of doing it all, getting back up to the plate, taking another swing.
Yeah.
You and even Paul, I was just teaching First Corinthians in our Bible study last night, our midweek study. He talks about sending Timothy to the Corinthians in 4:17. That is why I sent you Timothy, my beloved and faithful child in the Lord, to remind you of my ways in Christ as I teach
Mm,
them everywhere in every church. So that's even
mm.
how Paul is trying to kind of disciple the Corinthians from afar, to send them someone he has mentored who will help to
Wow.
then replicate those things in them. So
That's really good. I've seen that verse 100 times, but I've never looked at that. But yeah, you're right. He knows his ways.
That's
With
right. Paul
Christ,
teaches his ways. Timothy
Yeah.
knows Paul's ways. And of course, the point is not Paul, the point is Christ.
Right.
Whole
Christ.
catalog Paul's just given in First Corinthians
Yeah.
4 is all of his sufferings for the gospel.
Yeah.
He's walking in the way of the cross. Timothy's seen that. Timothy knows that. He's going to go tell these worldly Corinthians how to do that.
Yeah. That's really good. No, I love that. And yeah, it's exactly right. And that's what it is all about. That's fantastic, man. Well, I love that you're doing that and continuing that on. And I hope this catches, I don't know. Sometimes you feel like, man, we're the only ones doing it. And I'm sure there's more doing it, but I think there's a lot more that could be doing it.
Yeah, and I'm encouraged. I had the privilege of teaching a regular session at CHBC's Weekender when I was there on
Yeah.
pastoral training. And guys would often ask me about kind of low impact, $0 ways to start.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to kind of do that myself. And I think
Yeah.
if anybody out there wants to see our little curriculum or whatever, I'm happy to share it. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Again, it's not as deluxe as kind of all the stuff that CHBC
Right.
does.
Right.
But those guys also get more access to me and Michael as pastors. We're
Yeah.
we're not as busy. There's not as many people to shepherd.
Yeah.
They get really an up close and personal view of kind of everything going on. So
Yeah.
it's very all access.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And I think there's something to what you said, even about watching us parent or watching us just be who we are. So this young guy comes in Friday night. So Saturday, it's my wife's birthday. So she wants to go to Pittsburgh. So we're only about an hour and 20 minutes from Pittsburgh. Well, there happened to be a baseball game going on, an arts festival, con. There was so many people there. It was a mess. And I'm like, there's nothing like this guy seeing me in action and how I handle a lot of traffic, you know.
Yeah.
And
Oh
so
yeah.
I made that comment in church, and
Nope.
people were coming up
Nowhere
to me
to
saying,
hide.
yeah, what did Pastor say when he got mad at a car? They're trying to get the inside scoop. But the point is, even with our kids, they're watching that.
and they're learning whether good or bad. Man, I'm not going to do that with my kids, or I want to make sure I do this with mine. I think that's all part of it as we're with them, and they're seeing that and seeing us, like you said, a part of us in action
Mhm.
with it. So I think that's fantastic. So Bobby, I want to keep this going. I've loved this. This has been great. And if we have, I love your openness and candor with that. So I'm sure if any of these guys listen and have a question, they can reach out to you. And
Yep,
yeah, that's awesome. And I know, knowing you, you have it structured, written out, and you're ready
sure.
to go. That's awesome.
Info at trinitybc.church is kind of our front desk email.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. So let's talk about your days of editing. Let's talk about writing a little bit, because
Sure.
I've really appreciated your published work and the things that you've put out there. And it's you've thought through it. You've done a really good job. You're just not putting it together. And I think in the day and age of Instagram and vlogging and all of that, we've lost a little bit of the way the blog used to be, or where it was. But I still hear every now and then the importance of emails and making sure, your church family's hearing from you, or they're getting those emails, and we're putting some things in print or putting some things in writing. Do you think that even today it's important, even for a role of an assistant, to put something out, whether it's to the college kids youth group or even to his church, of making sure we're putting things in print and we're writing?
That's an interesting question. One thing it makes me think of is that, again, something I saw done really well at CHBC and that we've been glad to replicate is if you're thinking about ways to communicate with the whole church, I really like having a whole church prayer meeting.
Hmm.
So this is not the direction you're going, but if it's trying to get at something similar pastorally.
No, I like it.
Um, so CHBC, there's a 5 p.m. prayer service every Sunday. That's another gathering of the whole church, and that
Okay.
members are expected to attend, and that's more focused on sharing ministry opportunities, updates, interviews, missions partners, and then a whole bunch of prayer requests that both come out of the
Okay.
shared stuff and that a pastor will just assign out. And so it
Hmm.
really does focus on prayer. And then there's a short devotional teaching, like 15 minutes, one verse, rotating cast of younger up and coming preachers.
Yeah.
And we've essentially replicated that with minor tweaks for our church plant. And I would just say, I think as a venue for whole church communication, that kind of face-to-face
Mm.
ability to kind of get up and share. So I think about Jamie Dunlop, particularly in DC with people working in the government. Jamie's an associate pastor at CHPC.
Yeah.
He has kind of like a little mini sermon he gives in June for quote unquote Pride Month.
Mm.
Because so many people are having to address this in their workplaces and it's kind of, it's in the airwaves
Yeah.
and he gives a kind of little mini teaching that's really good, really thoughtful,
Mm.
5 points, all anchored in scripture, boom, boom, boom. And Jamie will do different little teaching things like that in different contexts. So at least before I left, Jamie's preaching a lot now that I'm gone, but before I
Yeah.
left, Jamie
Yeah.
didn't preach much. But
Okay.
Jamie had these ways of communicating very thoughtful teaching,
Mm.
very
Mm.
tailored to the congregation. And it was either in the evening service or a members meeting whenever he had a slot to give the financial
That's
update,
really
because
good.
he was the more administrative pastor. He would
So
kind of
let me,
work through a different teaching point.
yeah, yeah. So interrupting with that then, I did a book, wrote a book for assistant pastors. And one of the things I said with sermon prep, it's hard because, like you and I, you're going to First Corinthians Wednesday, and
Yeah.
what are you preaching through on Sunday?
Gospel of Mark about halfway through.
Okay, so you're halfway through Mark. I'm about halfway through Luke. I know chapter
Hmm.
12, I'll be in chapter 12 Sunday.
Yeah.
But as an assistant, that's hard because it might only be once a month,
Yeah.
or and so it's hard to keep that flow going. So you, even with that, then coming in, you've expressed a value then using just teaching a topic or teaching something that's prevalent.
Yeah, so I think as an associate pastor, it's good to find context that you can for regular Bible teaching, even if that's just
Hmm.
a small group or a Sunday school. But I do think based on your gifts and the needs of the church, um, it might be that there's ways you can study and learn and grow and put things together that can serve the whole church in different contexts. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess another one is if you have an adult Sunday school, it's a really rich opportunity, particularly maybe developing new curriculum, you yourself kind of
Mm.
learning, studying, sinking your teeth into something longer
Yeah.
term. I
Like
think
that.
teaching, even if it's only a fraction of the church who comes, well, you can save the curriculum and teach it on a rotating basis. You can use it as an opportunity for training other teachers. And even like if those manuscripts can circulate among the church, it becomes a resource. Maybe only
Yeah.
20 people came to the class. But if you keep the
Yeah,
manuscripts, people can access it, learn from it. So I think
that's
you
good.
know,
Yeah.
teaching kind of high caliber stuff in an adult Sunday school could be a really good outlet as an associate pastor. On the writing question, I certainly those kind of pastoral updates, letters, kind of communication with the congregation can be used wonderfully. I just,
Hmm.
I wonder about in our day of like oversaturated email inboxes, newsletters, Substack, junk email. It can be hard to get people's attention. If you're wanting to do something
Right.
that'll take 5 or 10 minutes to write, it can be pretty tough to get a high click-through rate or a high everybody's reading the whole email.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think writing is a little bit more of a niche kind of
Okay.
skill or approach to ministry. It certainly helps. It's a
Yeah,
helpful but I like, yeah, if there's a teaching context that in principle is open to the whole church,
that's
or just
great.
ways of sharing with and shaping the whole church,
Yeah,
like a prayer
yeah,
meeting or members meeting.
yeah. So like with you planting the church, you're seeing them in that face to face. Nothing's better than that. Just getting together, teaching, preaching.
It is well, and to have a whole church prayer meeting, we've had kind of Q&As on missions philosophy.
Hmm.
We've had conversations about biblical counseling. There's even been other topics we've been able to kind of
That's
address, like
great.
maybe me and Michael kind
Yeah.
of sharing a bit more, opening up to the congregation, inviting their questions. So I think there's also yeah, there's things you can do in that live face-to-face context of kind of informal teaching.
I love that. No, when you're preaching on Sunday or on your Wednesday nights, do you put handouts out to people? Or are you just teaching or how
We
do you do
do
it?
a handout for adult Sunday school. We don't do it for
Okay.
Wednesday night or Sunday. Wednesday
Okay.
night's more inductive. We have verses up on a whiteboard. And so
Okay.
me
I
or
love it.
Michael will
Yeah.
be scribbling on it,
Yeah.
making
That's my
connections,
favorite. Yep.
underlining.
Yep.
So that's the kind of whiteboard method which I like.
Yeah.
Um, I might very, very, very occasionally put an outline or something in a bulletin, but
Okay.
I want to lean toward in the preaching the kind of direct encounter with the Lord through his word.
And the
So
word of God.
I
Yep.
know that many people take
Man.
notes. I'm fine with that. I'm not
Yeah.
going to encourage it because I don't want people to feel in any way obligated. For
Yeah.
some people, it could be a distraction or a hindrance from just experiencing the Lord through His Word in the moment.
Right.
So I want to preserve as much as possible the format of the living Word through the living preacher.
Amen.
You're hearing it. That's
Yeah.
that's the thing, that's the
Yeah.
thing we're doing.
Yeah. I just wrote that down. The emphasis is to give our people a direct encounter with the word of God. I think that's so key and crucial today with that. So with an assistant, so you got Michael with you. Is he teaching then? You got him teaching the class or?
He kind of anchors our Sunday school, so he
Okay.
oversees it and he teaches frequently.
Okay.
Although we incorporate a lot of other teachers too, both
Hmm.
elders, guys aspiring to ministry, and even just godly laymen who might
Yeah.
have capacity
Yeah.
for the elders down the road. So that's a great training context for other
That's
teachers.
good.
So Michael oversees Sunday school. I will preach about he preaches about a quarter of the time and does Bible study about a quarter of the time as
Okay.
well.
Very good. All right. So coming back in, so he kind of oversees the Sunday school, and then you guys are using that as opportunities for guys to teach.
Exactly. And our evening devotionals as well, which we kind of parroted from CHBC. The adult Sunday school class is an opportunity for multiple teachers. Same thing with our evening devotional, because it's not a full-blown sermon. It's a sort of short meditation. We'll give counsel and equipping on the front end. We actually even want to read through the brother's notes or manuscript ahead of time. That's our kind of standing requirement.
Okay. I like
If
that.
you're
That's really good.
if you're anybody but a full-time preacher, we pretty much want
Yeah.
to read your manuscript, give you feedback on the front end, and then they can come to service review if they want, or we will especially make sure to give them feedback that comes out of the service review as well.
That's man. That's important too, and their willingness to listen to that and hear that. But that's all growth, right?
Yeah.
And it's teaching and that's helping them grow and helping them, whether official intern or just somebody in the church growing. Man, that's all. Jim, this has been fantastic, Bobby. Thank you so much for
Sure.
this information and for sharing all of this. And so one other question, and I'll finish up with this one. What would be some advice you would give? Let's say there's an assistant pastor listening and he was like, my pastor he's not much of a mentor. He doesn't understand he needs to take time with me. I feel like I'm on my own. The only mentorship I'm
Yeah.
getting is by listening to this podcast, whatever. What are some things that you could encourage them to do to even help grow? Or is there a way they maybe reach out to another pastor? Would you recommend who would be willing to pour into them that's not their pastor? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly pray. Um, I think it can be good at least to have like-minded pastors who, whether they're an assistant or senior pastor elsewhere, who you resonate with philosophically, who kind of understand your situation, particularly if there's somebody who's not in your church and who can help, not that they're like playing Absalom at the gate and like leading your heart away from
Right.
your senior pastor, or anything, but that
Right, right.
they can counsel you, they can encourage you, they can give you
Yeah,
advice. It'll hopefully help you serve better where you are. I can certainly think about kind of associate to senior pastor relationships that were, yeah, more distant, not as personal as they wanted, led to a
right,
hard working relationship. And I do
right.
think that's something to kind of keep a close eye on that could could be best resolved eventually by moving on to a different ministry. It's
Okay,
hard. If
okay.
the it's yeah, not to say it just depends. It depends on the degree of
It's
frustration.
hard. I know, I
It's
know.
hard. So yeah, you're kind of looking to supplement something. I mean, of course, you might have unrealistic expectations, but
Right.
I do think yeah, it's hard. What do you say to these? I mean, I was blessed. Mark was very open and very deliberate about kind of building in time for more personal
Yeah, yeah.
conversation. Um, what do you say to the associate or assistants?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. I think sometimes, again, like you said, it's what you're looking for is an unmet expectation. But I think sometimes, if by listening to this podcast, you would have to look and say, man, I could see where being mentored would have so many advantages. Where you're truly learning. I was on a Facebook page one time of young men in ministry and asked them how many of them out of about 2,000 felt like they were mentored when
Hmm.
they were assistants, and 70% said they were not.
Hmm.
And again, but what does that mean? But I think sometimes, like you said, as pastors, we bring in an assistant and they're busy. A pastor is busy. He's got this going on, that going on.
Yeah.
Look, I hired you to do your job, not just do it. And
Yeah.
you had your, you did you do undergrad at Masters? Is that where you did your?
I went to USC. I was doing music,
Okay,
but
okay.
I was at Grace Community Church as an undergrad. Yeah.
Oh, okay, very good. So, hey, you've got your degree. You sat under
Right.
MacArthur.
You
You're good to
said,
go.
yeah.
Just go. You know, and but there's a teaching that goes there. So I think like maybe it's just guys really got to pray about it and determine, okay, is this what I want or do I need to go somewhere where I can be mentored?
Yeah, and it depends on, is this a role you're wanting to stay in long term?
Right.
Is this a role that you're hoping will eventually lead to being a senior pastor?
Yeah.
It's hard. That's a hard
Yeah,
spot.
it is. It is. It's a hard spot. Or maybe for the young guys listening, that's a question that you need to ask or ask the assistant that was there before you came in. Do you feel like
Yeah.
the pastor mentored you? Did you get the mentorship you were looking for before you even jump into something like that?
And it might be that the Lord provides in a different way in a different season. A godly
Yeah,
older
that's true.
pastor,
Yeah,
whether from outside your current church or when you move on, or
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's really good. That's really good. Well, Bobby, thank you so much, man, for jumping on here with us and giving us some insight in regard to that. You've just fired me up to keep doing what we're doing now. Like, man, maybe I should get another intern in and
Appreciate
start
it, brother.
and start working and
Yeah.
going. But yeah, I
Good,
think it's
good
a
to scheme
great.
together about how to train pastors.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And like I said, I've seen your heart in that. I've read what you've written about it, and I've just appreciate you. And I think it was Phil Johnson said on our podcast that very, maybe he even said he had never seen Mark without an intern beside him. It's like he always had somebody with him, to
Pretty
come
much.
along to go
Pretty
and
much.
that's so important, because it's not that's the way we can outlive our ministry, right? And it carries on and we gain by losing in those ways. We get good men in and they're gone, but I mean,
Yeah,
I'm sure
and
that I
I
know,
would just say whatever. You don't have to be a Dever to do it.
yeah,
You could need a little more personal time or headspace.
yeah,
You could have a little bit lower relational capacity if it's only one guy at a time. If that's your kind
yeah,
of capacity to
yeah,
invest in that one brother well, maybe have him around for a year or two. Just go
yeah,
one by one. If that's what you
yeah.
can do, do it.
Do it. I love it, man. I love it. Well, again, thank you so much.